Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I had to get a coaching session on my next guest's name, and I really hope that I do it justice. I am going in my mind and saying the guest's name. It is Alain Hunkins. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Simone. That was great. Yes, Alain, you got it very well done. Very well done. It's a
My
French name.
goodness.
Thanks, Simone. That's fun.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you here. You are so masterful in your career journey. I read your bio, and so you are doing some great things. And plus, you've got some leadership lessons that I hope we will weave into the interview about cracking the leadership code, and just whether it's faculty work or the amazing client roster that you have. I'm well pleased to have you on the podcast to really talk about your journey. So I know we read the bio, but tell us a little bit more. Let us get to know you just a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, I have always been really fascinated about people, specifically, why do people do what they do? It really comes from my family of origin. I think, we talk about, we all learn about organizations from our primary organization that we learned, which is our family. And it turns out that I had a fairly unique upbringing. I didn't know it at the time because you just think, hey, it's in my family. So I was raised in New York. That's not unique. I was raised by a single mom, also not unique, and my grandmother. So that's not unique. The unique part is that both my mother and my grandmother, they're both Holocaust survivors. And so that experience, obviously, huge trauma. My mother was 7 in 1942 when the Nazis invaded Belgium, where she was growing up. And she was actually separated from her mother. And she spent 3.5 years in hiding through the Belgian underground. And they were reunited at the end of the war. And so luckily, they both survived. Most of the rest of the family did not. And that experience just completely changed their experience of the world, and certainly affected how they raised me. And I went to New York City public schools in the 1970s and 80s. And so there was this real disconnect between my experience in my home life. And then when I'd hang out, my parents were divorced. So like when I was at my dad's house or at my friend's house or at school. So I think part of my journey of trying to understand people and human psychology and behavior and motivation really comes from this wanting to reconcile that world and the kind of the trauma that they went through. So that's a bit about how I got interested in all this. And then I got interested, I dabbled in liberal arts college. I studied theater. I trained as a professional actor. And then I went on and got involved doing educational training in schools, which led to doing educational and leadership and management training in businesses. And I've been doing that work for almost 25 years now. So kind of a long and winding journey. So that's where it got me to where I am today. And lots of lessons and lots of hiccups along the way, for sure.
Well, now I'm curious because of the diversity and inclusion work that I do. I've immediately gotten curious about, well, what was your thinking when you were growing up and having these two different worlds, if you will, of what you wanted to be when you grew up? What was it that you wanted to be?
Well, what's so interesting is, so my grandmother was really my primary parent. And it's really interesting to think that here I was growing up in 1970s New York City, raised by a woman who was born in a little peasant village in rural Poland in 1909. And that was my primary parent, right? So, and what she used to tell me all the time is, Alain, whatever you want to be, you need to be happy. So it was much less focused on some external, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer. It was much more of, you need to be happy, which is in some ways ironic because she was not happy. She was, I think, we'd call it post-traumatic stress disorder, depression. She was really that way, but she knew she wanted something for me. And viscerally through osmosis, I got that sense. And so for me, I think about the work that I do. Nothing makes me happier than unlocking potential in people, like seeing those light bulb moments. These, Simone, right? Those light bulb moments where people discover something about themselves so that they can bring more energy to what they do and their mission and purpose in the world. So for me, I didn't know what that was. I just knew when I found that, that's what made me so happy. And so I just kept pursuing those things and shifting directions and changing gears so that I could do more of that more of the time, and ultimately trying to expand my platform out so that I could help more people in more ways. Because, if you ask me what drives you, it's not money, it's not titles, it is those moments. Like those moments when I'm with people like that, everything else is gravy. So yeah.
I love that as a navigator for your career. And so what was the aha moment for you on that journey as you said there were many hiccups along the way? What was the aha moment? This podcast is about being in the driver's seat for your career. And listeners, you've heard me say this multiple times. It's about getting really clear that your career is your responsibility. And so you get to decide the twists and turns that you take. You have a really hands-on approach to that. So what was the aha or the light bulb moment where you were like, yeah, I get to go here, there. What was it for
Yeah.
you?
So I had dabbled around some of these things around people. I had gotten into the world of the theater, and I, worked, and very quickly I went, I don't want to stand in 3-hour cattle call audition lines. That was not my place. And then I got involved with educational training, and I enjoyed teaching, and that was okay. It wasn't until I actually went, when I was probably about 26, I went off on this weekend intensive personal development workshop, where suddenly, and on this weekend, one of the exercises we did was coming up with clarifying what are your personal values and coming up with a mission statement. And they had a really simple formula for creating a mission. That a mission is a combination of a vision. So having, what's the vision of the world? If you can see yourself and others doing, what does that vision look like? Okay, so there's a paint the picture of the vision. So vision plus action. So what are you doing to put that vision into reality? And I came out of that, and that's your mission statement. It's like vision plus action equals mission. And I came out of that with a very clear mission statement, which was my mission is to create a vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people. And so for me, that was this aha moment. And also seeing all of these facilitators on this weekend, I went, I want to do what they're doing, because this has turned me on. I walked away and I was firing on all cylinders. I was just buzzing for weeks after this. And so I started volunteering. So how could I help be a co-facilitator, a junior facilitator in groups? And I wasn't getting paid, and I didn't care because I was getting so much out of it. So, people talk about following your passion. I think for me, it's following my passion and continuing to learn and develop skills that I can then start to apply in other places. Because I'll just share another side note on this. I remember earlier on when I was in graduate school for acting, it was summer, and I was waiting tables, and I had signed up at a temp agency. And a temp agency called me up. They said, "Hey, you're an actor. Can you operate a video camera?" This was like 1992. So these are like VHS beta big cameras, right? I said, "Yeah." They said, "Well, we'll pay you $9 an hour to go down to this place downtown Milwaukee." I was living in Milwaukee. Downtown. You're going to go to the First Wisconsin Insurance Company, and you're going to meet this guy, Mr. Marshall, in the lobby. So I go and I meet this guy, Mr. Marshall. Turns out Mr. Marshall is this guy, Tom Marshall. Tom and I had gone to undergrad together. He was a few years older. He was a transfer student, but Tom had gotten himself a job for a company called the Executive Technique in Chicago. And what they were teaching presentation skills to business executives. And I was there to run the video camera because we were doing videotape feedback. So he would take people off, show them the videotape so they could see feedback of their own presentation skills. So Tom is doing all this stuff with them. And on the first break, I stopped. I said, "Tom, you're basically teaching all of these business people acting skills," because so much of what he was talking about was around focus and clarity. And these were acting skills that I had learned in graduate school. He said, "Yes, yes, yes, but shh, we don't call them that because they don't think they're getting that. They think they're getting presentation." And so it was one of these moments where I realized, wow, I have skills that are actually transferable in other domains. And I think that lesson of realizing, how can the skills that I have be transferred? Because I think so many of us think, oh, I don't do that. We read job want ads, I'm not qualified, you know, because they list every single possible competency. Most people that apply for these things, they don't have all those skills necessarily. And what I have found so much is that, and this is another thing, and I had a great mentor who told me this. I grew up, I wish somebody had told me this 20 years earlier, because I got this lesson probably in my 40s. I grew up, I was a good student. And if you're a good student, you get recognized just for the fact that you test well, you follow the directions and you test well and you get recognized for that. And so I had this mentor who said, in your career, you have to realize you've got to let go, Alain, of this idea that good work is just going to speak for itself. Because I was also raised to don't toot your own horn. That's bragging, right? All of those, I'm sure you've had these conversations on here before, right? Don't toot your own horn, So that merit belief that if I just did good work, I would be discovered and picked and promoted. And the thing is, there is no there. The fact is, as this coach said to me, he said, look, if good work spoke for itself, the entire field of marketing would not exist. Right? Realizing is that you have to skillfully, tactfully market yourself, because yes, you can do great work, but the other two legs of that three-legged stool is you need social proof. That is, who else says you're good? So it's helpful to have endorsements from so-and-so and have been written in so-and-so magazines, because suddenly that influences how people think about you. And then the third piece of that stool, besides content and social proof, is your network. Is that you have to continually be building and planting seeds and maintaining relationships and building that network when you don't need it, so that when you do need it, it's already there for you. And for me, that is a lesson that I'm still learning, and just learning how to continually do that and finding ways to build relationships. Because for a long time, I was, a little shy, a little introverted, and just like reaching out. But on a certain level, like you said, like if you're going to be in the driver's seat of your career, there's no one else, if you don't do that yourself, you are now at the whim of someone else making those choices, which could be good or bad. And and I've worked in many organizations, I'm sure you've experienced this too, Simone, where frankly, it becomes a very inclusive club, exclusive club. And if you're in the in group, you get seen, you get promoted, and who knows why you're in the in club. Maybe, you look like that person, or you go to the same church as that person, or you're their nephew or brother or cousin, right? So it could be nepotism. There's all these reasons. And for me, I just tended to kind of run away from those organizations and those places. Like, oh, I don't want to be a part of that, because it's exclusive. I just felt wrong in that, and realizing that, I need to create my own opportunities through, as I said, building the content, getting the social proof, and building a network. So a little long
Woo!
answer to your question.
All right. I'm going to jump in here. I want to jump in. You said an awful lot, and it feels to me like part of that is the formula for owning your career. What you talked about, I can so relate, having been a introvert. That's my preferred Myers-Briggs testing, et cetera. I'm an introvert, right?
Yeah.
My preferred style. And I can relate to learning that good work speaks for itself. And podcast listeners, I talk about that. Toot, toot, toot. Go ahead and toot your own horn, because you must. You're going to get passed over if you don't. Some people are more savvy at doing that than others, but I completely agree with what you're saying. So let's slice and dice up what you just talked about, and compare it to what is your personal formula for owning your career, because it feels like pieces of what you just said are in fact the key ingredients for successfully navigating or being in the driver's seat.
Yeah. So I've thought about this a lot. In fact, so I have this book, Cracking the Leadership Code, and the subtitle of the book are The Three Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. And those three secrets to me are the same secrets. When I say leadership, this can be, in this case, self-leadership, because you have to lead yourself through your own career. So the three secrets are simple and they rhyme. It's connection, communication, and collaboration. So to me, in that order, so if I think about owning my career, ultimately, leadership is not an idea. And same thing with owning your career. It's like there's an idea. Ultimately, your career exists because you provide value to other people. I don't care what industry you're in, whether you're in retail or you're in high tech or you're in medicine, you are in the people business, right? So we're all dealing and working with other people. So the first piece to owning your career is around creating connections, real human to human relationships with other human beings. And, it seems so obvious, but I think, for example, how many of us on LinkedIn receive or send a connection invites to other people that are just the automated connect, versus just taking the time for a moment to personalize, like, why do you want to connect? Are you just connecting connections so you can say, I have 3,000 connections and 8,000 followers? Like, what's your end game here, as opposed to, here? And then how can I build a real relationship? Because it's about the quality of that relationship. That makes the difference. So I'd start with connection, and that comes through, first of all, building empathy, human empathy, showing people you understand them, care how they feel, and certainly taking an interest in them first, and then having some credibility that people see you have a track record, that you're good at what you do. And I think too many of us focus on, well, if I just do good work, like, well, it'll speak for itself. Like, that's the ticket to entry to me. It's like, yes, that's the baseline. Once you get back that, it's like, how do you start to connect and have to be actively reaching out to other people and doing it consistently? I love the story of Doug Conant, the CEO of Campbell Soup. I use this story too, is that when he was CEO, Campbell Soup had 20,000 employees, and over his 10-year career, he wrote 30,000 handwritten thank you notes to employees, right? So that's more than one per person. It works out to something like 10 a day, 7 days a week for 10 years. So I just think about just the process. Are you perpetually, I'm not saying you have to write 30,000 thank you notes, by the way, but just like, if you just like connected, made an intentional connection with one person every day in some way, that's 300 people, 365 people a year, right? So just thinking about, so to me, it starts with connection, and then it's about communication is the next piece. And that starting by listening, instead of like, hey, let me pitch you, look how great I am, versus, what do you do? Who are you? How can I learn more about you, with no attachment to trying to get anything from this at all? So that's about connection. And then once we can see where we are aligned, like, I find out that Simone has a podcast around owning your career. I don't come in here and say, like, hey, Simone, I would be an awesome guest on your podcast because I'm so wonderful. Talk about a turnoff, right? And I'm sure you get pitched like that too. This idea is like, we want to listen first, as opposed to, in sales, they call it show up and throw up, right? It's like, don't show up and throw up. Like, let me tell you how great I am. Like, listen to people, understand who they are, what drives them, what their needs are, and then find ways with what you have being aligned, and work to create partnerships. I love this idea of partnership. I use it. I no longer send proposals where for business where I'm like, hey, thank you for willing to partner with me, because I want to work with partners, and I think of business partners and clients, they're partners. And so for me, it's that paradigm of connection, communication, and collaboration is such a key to driving one's career.
Love that. Love that. I use the P's for mine, plan, partner, and promote.
Awesome.
So I love the cracking the code and the three C's along with it. Can you help our listeners who are not savvy at doing some of these C's inside of organizations? Let's go inside of corporate America, or inside, if you're not working for yourself, but working for someone else. And now we've got this virtual situation. What are some strategies internally that people can use to connect? I know you mentioned sending the note. Give us some more things to think about.
Well, here's a radical concept, super simple, that most of us, like, again, if you're going in, you're working with a team of folks, and you're virtual, you meet every so often. Before you get into the content of what you're doing, just take a minute, and I've written some articles about this too. Just take a minute to check in with the person, not the employee and the title. Let me check in. And here are 3 super simple questions that you can be asking. First, how are you feeling? Like, really, not just like, I'm fine, how are you? But like, how are you feeling? And what a great opportunity to do that now, because let's face it, we're all dealing with a global health crisis, and these are weird times. So suddenly that question is no longer strange to anybody, right? We're now looking at the bigger issues of life and death, literally, because it's all around with the pandemic. So how are you? How are you feeling? And then anything distracting you from work, because there's plenty, right? So anything distracting, and that's number 2. Number 3 is, how can I support you? Anything I can do to support you? if you start to do that and just ask those human to human relationship questions, and you can do that, you have a half an hour meeting and you take literally 2 minutes just to check in first. Maya Angelou said, this quote, I'm sure, is that people won't remember what you said or what you did. They'll remember how you made them feel, right? And so emotions are what drive behavior. Emotions are what drive people's belief in whether or not they trust you and like you and want to work with you. And so tapping into that by being willing to go there first. I think so many of us think, oh, that's not my job. I'm not the senior leader. And there's nothing stopping you from checking in with another human being and saying, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Or if you notice somebody doing something well, is to take that moment. You might think, oh, that's great. Just because you think it doesn't mean they know it. You're thinking that. I found some research is that about 85% of managers and leaders think that they appreciate their employees enough. And only about 20% of people say that their leaders and managers actually appreciate them consistently. So there's this gap. And inside we all have great intentions. So a big part of, and I can say leadership, not as a title, but as a state of me being and doing, is all those thoughts, all those good intentions you have, find ways to reach out, be quick, being able to, it's a quick, like, hey, great job on that. Just being overt and closing the gap, because that is what will make a difference in how people feel about you and how they will respond to you. So these are some simple things you can do to start to build connection between you and others.
Thank you so much for those tangible tips that our listeners can take advantage of. I wonder, can you share some resources that you believe are helpful or would be helpful that people can tap into? I know before you mentioned attending a retreat, not sure if you recall the name of the retreat. Maybe someone listening is interested, or any resources, books, podcasts, whatever resource you feel would be helpful to get someone the right mindset, or just to be well positioned in the driver's seat. What can you recommend?
Oh my gosh, there's so many great resources out there. So one of the books that really struck me around this is there's a book by Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is kind of a classic in the field. And there's so many, it's around leadership, but it's around so much more. The idea is that so many of the skills that got you to where you are today aren't what you need to do to advance further and continue to climb in whatever that is. So one of my fave things out there as well. In terms of podcasts, I'm a huge fan of Coaching for Leaders. Podcast host is Dave Stachowiak. It's called Coaching for Leaders. He just does such a good job of interviewing some really high level thinkers, and so that's one of my go-to podcasts around that. And then in terms, obviously, all of these things are around taking on new behaviors and embedding some new habits. And my favorite person around this, there's Dr. BJ Fogg, who's got a book called Tiny Habits, which I cannot recommend highly enough. And if you're interested in learning how to develop habits over time, he has really broken this down to the science and teaching you how one of the keys to building any habit is it isn't about willpower. It's actually about setting the bar super low, doing just a little tiny bit, and then learning how to celebrate it so that your central nervous system embeds the positive emotion as a reinforcement to get you to do it again. So those are a few of my recommendations around that. People are welcome to, I put out a monthly newsletter that has links to articles that I curate that are around leadership and human behavior. So if people want to subscribe to that, that's a free newsletter. That is a resource that a number of thousands of people really find valuable. So.
Wonderful. Well, since we went there, please tell our listeners how they can, in fact, stay connected with you.
Sure. Probably the easiest place to go first is the book has its own website, which is www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. That'll take you right to the book webpage. You can download the first chapter and get a preview of the book. And also, when you do that, that will link you, so you'll be on my newsletter list. And there's also other information on my website, which is Alain, Alain Hunkins. So it's ALAINHUNKINS.com. And that'll tell you all about the various work I do with individuals, teams, and organizations. One of the things I'm super excited about right now is I've been producing and leading these 30-day leadership challenges that involve positive psychology, habit formation, and micro-learning asynchronously, where people are coming together in a community cohort to basically practice becoming a better leader in 5 to 10 minutes a day over 30 days. So there's all that information is on there too. I'm super excited about that. It's something I just launched in the last 4 months, and it's starting to take off. So watch out, world. It's coming.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, Alain, I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. So many wonderful nuggets, leadership and otherwise, that you have shared with the audience. Any parting words?
So one of my favorite things, parting word, real quick tip, super tip. If you want to get better at everything, people are notoriously bad at self-awareness, is reach out and ask people for feedback. What do you think I do well? What are some things that you think I could be doing differently and better? And don't just go to your mom and your dog, people who are going to say, you're perfect, don't change. Go to find those people who will give you the honest truth about some areas you can improve. I'll say it's not comfortable, but like I say about leadership is about learning how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And frankly, that's where the growth and the magic happens, is when you get out of your comfort zone. So reach out and ask people for feedback. It's my number one top tip for how to develop your own leadership and your own career.
Love that. Love that extra nugget that you just threw in there. I just thought of another question I do want to ask you. I want you to share with our listeners. If you were to title your body of career work, what would the title of, I know you have a book, Cracking the Leadership, but what would your career title be?
Oh my gosh, that's a really tough question.
Okay.
We can edit out the pause part here, because like,
all right.
There we go. What would it be? Constantly learning. Yeah. That's a tough, constantly learning, because that's what it's about. I just think leaders are learners and learners are leaders, and life is about learning. So constantly learning.
Nice. Well, thank you. I didn't mean to stump you here.
You totally stumped me there, Simone.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you again for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
You're most welcome.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.